Matthew Lee Johnson has just been executed after spending more than a decade on death row. Today, I'll tell you the details of his crime, one of the most brutal ever recorded in Texas. The story of how he set a 76-year-old grandmother on fire during a robbery. We'll also go over his execution, what his last meal was, and what he said in his final words. Matthew Lee Johnson, originally from Dallas, had a childhood marked by a lack of supervision and early drug use, starting with marijuana at age 7 and later progressing to crack and PCP in high school. At 19, he married Daphne, but his addiction quickly worsened, to the point where a friend once had to tie him to a bed due to his manic behavior. In 2004, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a drug-fueled robbery. There, he managed to stay sober, improved his attitude, and even took a parenting course. After his release in 2009, he remained clean for several years, had another child, got promoted at his job in a mechanic shop, and found some stability. However, in 2011, after buying their first house and facing financial stress when his wife lost her job, Johnson relapsed. It wasn't until 2012 that Matthew Lee Johnson committed one of the most horrific crimes ever seen in Garland, a suburb of Dallas. On the morning of May 20th that year, he entered the Fina Whip-In convenience store where 76-year-old Nancy Judith Harris worked, a beloved grandmother in her community. Johnson brought with him a bottle of lighter fluid and a lighter. He approached Harris while she was behind the counter and poured the flammable liquid over her head. He then forced her to open the cash register. As she tried to comply, he stole 2 lighters from the display, 2 packs of cigarettes, and even a ring from her finger. Once Harris finally opened the register, Johnson took the money and set her on fire. According to court documents, Harris, engulfed in flames, desperately ran to a nearby sink trying to put out the fire. Meanwhile, Johnson casually walked out of the store and even paused to grab some candy before fleeing. He ran through the neighborhood, stripping off his clothes. When police caught him, he mockingly said, "What took you so long? You're getting slow." Nancy Harris was rushed to the hospital with 2nd to 4th degree burns on 40% of her body, including her face, chest, arms, legs, and hands. She died 5 days later, on May 25, 2012, after her family authorized the removal of life support. She left behind 4 sons, John, Brian, Scott, and Chris. An hour after the attack, Johnson was arrested and confessed to setting Harris on fire. At trial, he claimed he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol and hadn't intended to kill her, only to scare her. The prosecution, however, highlighted his criminal history, while the defense presented witnesses who spoke of his role as a father and his ongoing battle with addiction. In 2013, Johnson was sentenced to death. Since then, he filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied, including one by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2024. His most recent appeal, where he accused the Texas Attorney General of influencing the timing of executions, was rejected by the 5th Circuit Court just 2 days before the scheduled date. Matthew Lee Johnson never claimed to be innocent. According to his attorney, he was deeply remorseful for what he did. Since being on death row, Johnson tried to rehabilitate. He completed a faith-based program and, from prison, worked to be a positive influence on his wife and daughters, hoping they wouldn't follow the same path he did. Johnson was executed on Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, by lethal injection, exactly 13 years after the crime. It took place at the Huntsville unit north of Houston. His execution was the 4th in Texas this year and the 18th in the United States. Elizabeth, Nancy Harris's daughter-in-law, witnessed the execution along with her husband Chris, Harris's sons Scott and John, and granddaughter Shelby. Afterward, she stated firmly, "We had reached the point where we were just tired and wanted it to be over. The truth is, there's no such thing as healing. Days get easier, but you never fully heal. Since 2011, inmates in Texas are no longer allowed to choose their last meal, following public outrage over an excessive meal ordered by inmate Lawrence Brewer, who didn't eat any of it. According to reports, Matthew Johnson had requested ice cream as his last wish, but that request was denied.